and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, it's Matt O'Meara of Gondor.
That's right. I'm noble, and everyone loves me, but everybody's going to unfairly think of me as the villain of this podcast, even though I was only as weak as any man would have been in that situation.
Yeah, but someone has to be the first man to be weak. And that was you.
That's so. I guess so.
This week on the show, it is time once again for the Doof Canon. Matt, what is this Doof Canon thing we do?
Well, once a month, those individuals that donate to us on Patreon at the Council of Doof level get to collectively decide on a movie for the community to consider for entrance into the Doof Canon. Scott and I will then meet and talk about the movie and present our case for why it should or should not be admitted.
But as always, we do leave that final decision up to you guys. So stick around, listen to our arguments, and then find a link in the show notes of this episode to head on over to our Patreon page where you can cast your vote. You do not need to be a patron to do that. It is open to the public. So head on over there and cast your vote. I have a sneaking suspicion I know what your vote is going to be. And that is because, Matt, what has our council brought for us this month?
This month, the council has nominated the 2001 film The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Oh, that little old thing?
Yeah, I've heard of this movie.
That little old 23-year-old movie?
Yeah, I guess everybody found out it was my birthday week, so they gave me a present.
To be clear,
uh-huh.
It is not your birthday week.
Look, the concept of birthday week for me is more like sort of a rolling 2-week window centering on the birthday. So a big, and it stretches depending on whether I feel like it should or not. So this is my birthday week right now.
Yeah, I understand that you choose to celebrate a birthday like you are a 13-year-old girl. I understand that, and I accept it.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost always... We're almost always celebrating someone's birthday in my household.
and 9/10 of the time, it's yours.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know.
All right, Matt. Let's get into it. Let's talk about this movie. Matt, it feels weird doing this, but this is our standard, this is what we say, this is how we do it. What is this movie all about?
A meek hobbit from the Shire and 8 companions set out on a journey to destroy the powerful One Ring and save Middle-earth from the Dark Lord Sauron.
This movie was written by Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. It's based on a book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called The Lord of the Rings, and it's same name. They didn't change the name or anything. It is directed, of course, by Peter Jackson. It stars Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, and all those, you know who it stars. Right. Everyone knows who worked on this movie. Everybody knows. And I find myself in a weird position here, Matt, because I love this movie so much. And I don't want to just say I love this movie 12 times and call that an episode. But I love this movie so much.
When we were talking about it earlier, I said this movie is a miracle, which is a statement that I stand by, because it's just you're watching it and you're like, how did they do this?
Yeah.
And then the funny thing is, we've both watched all the special editions and everything, so
yeah,
we kind of know how they did this, but that still doesn't feel like it answers the question, because it takes something more than just artistry. It takes a real passion and devotion to pulling off this thing that was sort of impossible to even ask to do something like this, and yet they did it. It's a gift to the world. I mean, what's funny is that the Lord of the Rings books are a gift to the world, and then these movies are a separate, also gift to the world.
Yeah, separate is the apt word there. I think. I think people probably know this already because we've worked these films into so many conversations we've had over the years. But I approach these things from a little different angle than you do, because I had not read the books when this movie came out. In fact, I know that's true because I distinctly remember, Matt, I don't know if you remember this, the year is 1999. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is the hottest show on TV. And the
Uh-huh.
$500,000 question on one episode in the fall of 99 is, which of these four things is not a Pokemon? And it was Jigglypuff, Pikachu, Squirtle, and Frodo.
Uh-huh.
And I got the answer right, but only because I knew what those three Pokemon were. I did not know what a Frodo was because I had not read the books and the movie had not come out. Which, thinking about it, isn't that like the perfect encapsulation of how much the world has changed since the year 1999? That question was the $500,000 question, the penultimate question of who wants to be a millionaire. Now that would be like the $200 question because everyone taking the competition would know both Frodo and what Jigglypuff is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Pokemon that you named were all the ones that I knew, and I was never even that into Pokemon either, so,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
for sure.
So yeah, I didn't really get into this world until I saw this first movie. I believe I believe these all came out in December, right? I have a very distinct memory of it being like winter break, um, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Possible. I don't necessarily remember it being cold, but,
We do live in Texas, so that maybe doesn't mean anything.
yeah, let's
December
let's
19th, December
yeah,
19th,
okay.
2001. There
Yeah,
you go.
because I'm pretty sure I did the midnight releases for most of these movies.
I did not for this first one because again, I didn't. It was like, oh, okay, and I went and saw this in my family. My dad had read the books and loved the books, so like he kind of took the family out there. And yeah, I mean, my reaction to this movie, Matt, is I was absolutely blown away. I was completely blown away. I went out and read the books before the next two movies came out. Um, and this is, you talked about how we had both seen the special features. I want to be clear here. Not only have I watched all three of these movies, the extended edition, a billion times, I have watched the special features, and when I say the special features, I mean every single one. These extended editions also have multiple directors' commentaries on them. It's like one with Peter Jackson. There's one with some of the actors. I think there's multiple commentaries with different actors. I have watched every single one of those commentaries. I have consumed every single thing that was on the discs for these movies. So, yeah, I mean, I think out of anything we've ever talked about on the canon, I feel like this is definitely one of the most important films to me, for sure.
Yeah, I think this may be one of the films that probably led both of us to love film as much as we do.
I think so, yeah.
I mean, with two of the others being the Two Towers and Return of the King. Um, but yeah, yeah. So I think we've given our bona fides. I mean, I guess my own bona fide is like I've just always been obsessed with these movies and these books, and they are like a core pillar of my like worldview and life philosophy. In addition to just being things that I love. But it's funny because I feel like I've underappreciated the Fellowship of the Ring as a movie and the place that it holds in the story. And this becomes, I think, especially true when you watch the special edition, because the special edition really takes its time and lets all of the characters breathe and lets all of the establishment of all of the characters' arcs really take root and be
Yeah.
properly dramatized. Like I would go so far as to say, like a lot of the special edition, extended edition scenes in the later movies are like fun, and you're like, oh, that's cool. Okay, we got to see the scene where Merry and Pippin drink the Ent draft. That's fun. Okay, it's not critical, right? There are a few scenes in the later movies that I would say like, oh, they should have left those in, but
Yeah.
on the whole, I'm not bothered by it. But the Fellowship of the Ring, like every extended scene in this movie is like, oh god, this is so much better. Like this is such a better. Just the dialogue scenes are given more room to breathe by just not sort of cutting it so tightly.
Yeah.
Like I said a second ago, you get to know all of these Fellowship characters better, and you understand where they're coming from and sort of their like initial conflicts with each other, and then how things soften over time. Like you get to know Boromir a lot better, who's a character that essentially doesn't show up beyond this movie, and so any extra getting to understand and empathize with Boromir, I think, is important. But on the whole, like whether you're talking about special extended edition or not, the reason the trilogy works is because the first movie is extremely good. It's
Yeah.
an extremely
Yeah.
good movie on its own. I feel like sometimes I just want to watch Return of the King because that's like the bombastic one with all the awesome scenes and all the awesome speeches and fights.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
movie is awesome actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to pick a favorite of these three, but I agree with you. Okay, let's attempt to talk about just this movie instead of talk about the whole trilogy
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
going to keep falling into that. Um, I do agree with you that I think there is something special and unique about this film, and it did probably have the heaviest load to lift because there's a lot of lore and exposition we have to get across before we can really get the story moving. And I do think this movie handles that task excellently. One of the things, just because I do come at this as from a different angle than you, because I didn't know any of the story of this really before I went into it. One of the things I think this movie does so well, and I was paying a special attention to it when I rewatched it this week, was the way it kind of very, very expertly hints to you at the larger mythology of this world. Um, in a way that doesn't hold your hand, that doesn't stop to explain everything, but just makes you feel like this is one part of a larger world. I mean, the thing, one of the things I'm thinking of that I messaged you about this morning is the one scene when the Fellowship is gathered, they're on their quest, and then the Saruman's big like thing of crows comes after them,
Mhm.
and Legolas just looked at them and he says like Krebin from Dunland or whatever. And
Yeah.
like neither of those words are words that make any sense at
Uh-huh.
all. They're not real words. And yet you're just so inundated into a world in which you know that means something very specific. And the movie always does like it doesn't have to explain where's Dunland and why are these special ravens called that or
Uh-huh.
whatever crow like, but it's just like, oh, I feel like that's something and everyone knows and reacts to that, and it's everything in this movie. Like the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen is not like totally explored. It's just like hinted at and referenced to. Like what Aragorn is like just kind of hinted at and referenced to. Like we don't we learn kind of very nebulously like what the elves even are. Like
Mhm.
this is just like it's all there and it's in the air of the film, but like we don't I try to imagine what it would have been like to be sitting down trying to adapt to this thing and like thinking all this stuff is like, well, how are we going to get people to understand why elves are the way they are? How are we going to get people to understand the significance of this relationship between these two people? Like, how are we going to like it's so rich and so detailed because Tolkien spent so much time on it, and the way that they went through it was just we're going to give hints of it, we're going to gesture towards it, we're like but you're never going to feel like it's necessary to get you from one scene to the next because on top of that we're just going to do some good old fashioned character work. Like all that mythology is there, but the thing that's supporting is just these are good characters and just a simple good story.
Yeah. I think on top of that, something that I really appreciated more and more as I've gotten older, I guess, for whatever reason, is that I think he takes a lot of that lore and he makes it visual
Yeah.
instead of narrative or verbal. Um, and he takes a lot of the tone and he makes it visual too. Like there's sort of two points that I was thinking about a lot in this story, and they're like opposite points, but they make the same um, they make the same point, which is like you don't want we don't want to spend a lot of time explaining like what's a Nazgul, what's the nature of the magic of the ring, how do the Nazgul work exactly, and similarly, you don't want to talk so much about magic, and you don't want to talk
Yeah.
about like, well, what can Galadriel do, and what can Galadriel not do, and what can Gandalf do?
Yeah, we don't actually ever say like what Gandalf actually is. Like
Yeah,
the hobbits call him a wizard, and then like he's referred to by his various other names by other people, but there's never a moment where someone like turns to Frodo and says, "This is what this means
yeah.
actually."
I don't think there is in the book either. I mean, I might be totally spacing, but like they might refer to him as an Astari, but you have to read like the appendices to know what an Astari is. So it's not like the
Mhm.
book really tells you a lot of these things either.
Yeah.
But like the two moments that I was thinking about that are just like stunning and somehow like nothing has ever come close to them. Maybe there's three moments actually, but they're like, they're on Weathertop. They're running away from the Nazgul, who are who've been portrayed as being utterly terrifying up until this point in the story. There's so much good Peter Jackson directing, and just the dark evil imagery of these cloaked evil crawling creatures with their spiky armor and their bloody horses and everything. And they corner Frodo, and he's pulling out the ring, and it's like, oh yeah, they told you not to pull out the ring, but I guess this is one case where you might want to pull out the ring because you're gonna have to escape from these guys. They're gonna kill you. And he puts on the ring, which is the worst possible thing he could have done, right? Because then
Yeah.
now you really see the Nazgul, and they're
Mhm.
even more scary than you already thought they were.
Yeah.
They're nightmare creatures, and everything's like distorted, and there's like the roaring blackness around, like the whispering and dark speech, and it's just the coolest thing in the world. Like, and and like and weird too, not like it's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's aesthetically very unique and strange, and it's unlike anything else that you can really put your finger on. And just to finish my thought here, to round it out, like, you don't want to over explain Galadriel and her like beautiful elf magic. It's like, what are we gonna do? And it's like, no, you just see her coming down the stairs with her husband, and
Yeah.
it's like everything is glowing and white and perfect, and has this like extreme sort of contrast in the lighting, and that you see in the characters' reactions, and like just everything about it is visually conveyed, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and she's
yeah.
kinda scary too because she's
Yep.
like the thing where she's mid-sentence and then starts talking
Hmm.
mentally to Frodo is terrifying a little bit, like,
Yeah.
all that stuff is perfectly handled. Like, this is the thing that I really just can't stress enough is that, like, you talked about this movie being a miracle, and I think you're right, and it's like Peter Jackson being the perfect person to bring this story to life is just not something I would have ever thought, like, watching the early films of his career.
Yeah.
And, like, I do remember there was a time in my life when I was maybe less savvy at studying films where I was like, "Man, it's so weird that the guy that made The Frighteners and Meet the Feebles and these nonsense kind of horror comedy things that he did before this made this movie and decided to make this trilogy." And, like, man, the whole time I was watching it this time, I was like, yeah, this is Peter Jackson. Like, it's
Hmm.
just completely Peter Jackson. The way he makes this world awesome but terrifying constantly. Like, his camera work is all over this place. Like, sometimes he just like cranks the FPS of the just he just we're not going to
Hmm.
do 24 frames a second anymore. We're just going to slow that down a little bit.
Hmm.
Just for no, and it's not, I'm not talking about slow mo. I'm just talking about like kind of rough, almost unfocused, like it just like feels weird and off-putting that the movie just like starts kind of jumping frames instead of just playing things out smoothly.
Hmm.
Like, it's just really really interesting, really off-putting. It's terrifying. It's like you're captivated. Like, it's Peter Jackson through and through.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's a horror to it all. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the, you know, I think, I don't remember who said this or where I saw it originally, but just like understanding that like the core of fantasy is actually horror to some degree, and also wonder. Obviously,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
it's got the full emotional range. I think one of the great things about this movie is it gives us a huge chunk of time toward the beginning where everybody's happy and everything's great, and you got hobbits running around being goofballs, and then do you smash between that and like terrifying Nazgul on a horse with nails jammed through its hoof, and it's like I think that's part of what works so well is Peter Jackson is able to be both funny and then also sort of this grandiose horror, almost like cosmic horror mixed with just like the mundane horror of like little creepy guys crawling around underground, and um, Yeah, no, I agree though. It's all, the sort of, I don't know, the push zoom, the classic Peter Jackson push
Yeah,
zoom that he
yeah,
does in a few places in, I mean, throughout all these movies really, but it's like, um it's perfect for what it is. It doesn't feel, I mean, maybe part of that is that we just grew up with it, but I think it's just like, no, the movie calls for sort of an elevated bombastic style.
yeah,
Because I mean, to underline what you're saying, it's like if you try to imagine what these movies would look like if directed by anyone else, just, assume, pretend that all of the like cast and the decor and the costumes are the same without Peter Jackson, which is of course ridiculous because he is the driving force behind everything being as perfect as it was. But just
hmm,
pretend that it's only just a different eye behind the camera, it would feel totally different.
yeah,
Like his fingerprints are all over the style of like the where the camera is, how many close-ups we're getting, how much time we spend lingering on people's faces as they react to things or say things, um, and then a lot of these, grand operatic sweeping shots of things. They just feel like things that I don't like. I can't think of any other director who would do that, do
yeah.
it that way.
And I think, and I mean, credit to the actors, of course, but I think this also has to be given credit to Peter Jackson on the dialogue is very well done,
Mhm,
but the performances, like he characters talk poetic, like they almost get into like a pentameter when they're talking
mhm.
sometimes. Like the thing that I just can't get over is, when they get DeLorean for the first time, and I'm blanking on the character's name, but when he says is like, uh, nine there were set out from Rivendell, but like eight I see now, but nine there were set out from Rivendell, and it's like it's got a pentameter to it. It's like he's
Yeah.
speaking in poetry, and so many of the characters do that. Like just think, like you look at some of these actors that and you've seen in other things, like and you're just like, oh, they're doing something very specific and different here. Like, I mean, I think um Viggo Mortensen in particular, like he is doing something really interesting in this movie. Just the way he reads the lines, the way he's kind of soft spoken, and like I love his line performance in this
Yeah.
movie. And like you watch Viggo Mortensen something else, it's completely different. Um,
Mhm.
and that has to be like the elves always talk in this kind of pentameter, like and the way the dwarves talk, and just like everyone has not only a unique look but a unique sound and a unique rhythm to the way they talk, and it's just like all this stuff was thought out.
Yeah, exactly. Based on their culture and where they're
Hmm.
from. I mean, um,
And like I said, I love that the movie doesn't stop to explain that to us. It just is like like they go to Moria and Gimli's talking about his cousin, but we don't know any of the past of Moria. We don't know anything. We
yeah,
just know like this is this place. What is Moria? It's a mine, and the dwarves were there. And at what I'm about to say, at one point, like his Gimli's cousin like let a force back in to take the mine back over, but that's even bringing extraneous information that I know into it. The movie
yeah,
doesn't really even say that. Um,
yeah,
but it's just like you just get this, you see this dwarf culture, but you see it destroyed and dead, and it's just it causes you to kind of perk up a little bit because you're seeing pieces of the mythology but not the whole thing, and not in a way that it's like it never stops the forward momentum of the story itself.
right. And it always feels consistent and like there is this deep story behind it, which there
Yeah,
is, right? And
yeah.
I think that's what separates it from a lot of other fantasy stories that we consume is just
Hmm.
the magnitude of that depth.
Yeah.
Um, the yeah, I think for some reason Gimli as a character stood out to me on this viewing. I've watched this movie like 50 times probably, but like I don't know, I don't even know why exactly. Like I think it's just there's a real earnestness to the performance, even though he's kind of a comic relief character. It's
Yeah.
like that doesn't stop John Rhys Davies from giving it his all.
Hmm.
I think especially in the extended edition, you understand like Gimli's just more of a character in the extended edition. Um, there's a lot more with Gimli and Legolas is being set up because like they don't really start to deepen their friendship until the later movies, but at least in this one, there's the moment where like because Gimli starts out literally like frothing at the mouth, saying no one trusts an elf. Is like
Yeah.
one of the first things you see from him, and then he meets Galadriel, and he like is in love with her and thinks she's just so beautiful, and Legolas sees this and appreciates it, and that's like an important story moment, I think, for them, is like, okay, this is not an unbridgeable gap, but there still needs to be some work done here, and that's what the rest of the series is. But I don't know. I guess I was just appreciating his performance and like the makeup. Like your brain just decides like, yeah, that's Gimli. Like I
Yeah.
don't, I never see John Rhys Davies. I almost don't believe that that's who that is, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
no, John Rhys Davies he's a normal sized man. It's like idiot. It's a movie. Like obviously they're doing camera tricks, which still, by the way, fool me every time I watch the movie, even though I know
Yeah.
exactly how they're doing it.
Yeah. I mean, this movie's 23 years old, as we said, right? This is
Mhm.
an old movie, quote unquote, now. I actually think this is one of the further parts of why it's a miracle. Because I think these movies came out at the exact perfect time for it to do this really fascinating mix of traditional camera tricks, miniatures,
Mhm.
CG, and all these things kind of mixed together in this perfect blend. Whereas, like, I think The Hobbit is a perfect example of like, had these movies come out even 10 years later, right? Like,
Yeah.
they would just be inundated with CG. And it's not that there's not computer graphics in this movie. Obviously, there are. There's a whole bunch of them. But the movie, both by desire and also kind of necessity at the time, so much of it had to be done practically. So much of it had to be done via those force perspective camera tricks. Like, and not only just force perspective, but like they invented all this technology for like moving camera force perspective.
Yeah.
That was the thing that they did that was really cool here.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't want to make this the CGI dump fest hour, because like I think CGI is incredibly amazing tool, and then when used well, it can be spectacular and awe-inspiring, just like this movie is. I mean, look at the Avatar film from a couple years ago. Like, but man, like this movie always feels tactile. It always feels like you're in the room with the characters. Like they look grimy and dirty, and the place around them. Like I can't get over how good that the final room they're in Moria,
Yeah.
the grave room, like how good everything in that room looks. Like that's a really significant moment for me, and that's the reason why I think I keep going back to it, because Moria is this moment which this movie has been going on for an hour and a half at this point, and it's been really good. It's been really interesting. There's been pretty tense action sequences, um, but Moria is when you get to see the Fellowship fight for the first time. And I very much remember the first time I saw this movie, sitting up in my chair and going, "Oh, we're doing this too?" Like I
Mhm.
I was so into this movie and was like, "Oh, it's like a war movie too now?" Like and like being like, "Fuck yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome." And it's like everything was kind of leading up to the moment where the first time that Legolas takes out his bow and Aragorn takes out his sword, and we're doing it, and it's like, "Oh hell yeah, this does have everything." But
Mhm.
man, that room and just like the light that's used on it, and this like, oh, it's
Yeah.
everything working together.
I was gonna. It's so funny. I was sort of building up toward mentioning this scene as well. I think this scene is sort of a spine of the movie, and I think it's one of the best. I think it's one of the best sequences in the entire series. To be honest,
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
perfect, right? Um, I think one thing I noticed on this viewing is like we barely see orcs before this moment. Like we
Yeah.
kind of we see them a little bit in the prologue. We see a couple orcs like chopping down the trees of Isengard, kind of from a distance, and they're kind of like dumpy, like goofball looking orcs at that point. Um, and then we see the doors burst open here, and these are monsters, these are terrifying creatures.
Yeah.
Like these are the Moria goblins. They look totally different. Their faces and their eyes are like some kind of like you know subterranean cave fish creature that just it's utterly bizarre and weird, and they're all like hunched over with their like lobstered armor and everything. And then I think just ties perfectly into what you were saying a minute ago about the perfect timing and the perfect use of CGI, because most of that is just dudes in costumes running around making scary noises and shaking their swords, and then our main actors hit them with their prop swords, and like fundamentally what's happening is very very simple, but like the camera is clever, the camera cuts, the camera moves around a lot, gives you a sense of like, oh my god, we're being buffeted by this mass of orcs, and our heroes are barely surviving by the skin of their teeth, and that only works because it's all live action. And then in the midst of that, which is already awesome, it probably would have been awesome without the cave troll. But
Hmm.
in the midst of that, we have the cave troll. There's
Yeah.
a fully CGI thing that is just like flawlessly like weaving in and out of what is already an awesome action scene, and
Hmm.
like elevating it even further, like the bit where Gimli is like running around fighting orcs and the cave troll is swinging at him with his club, and every time he swings it hits one of the orcs instead. and and you're like, that's exactly how you should use CGI. Like that's
Yeah.
the perfect use for this, because it was, again, already good, very grounded. The camera work is very grounded. We have like relatively fast cutting, but not too fast cutting. And then there's
Yeah.
a cave troll there.
I think I didn't actually remember, and it had been a while since I watched this movie. I think before I had kids, I probably rewatched the series about once a year, but it's been a little bit. I didn't remember how kind of guerrilla style some of the action sequences are shot, and by
Mhm,
that I mean you're right. It's fast cutting. It's kind of quick, abrupt camera moves. The
mhm,
camera is very close to the actors and the action. Like there are wide scenes that we cut to occasionally, but a lot of it's that very close, intimate camera work, which I think you're absolutely right. It really helps establish this idea that they're overwhelmed and barely surviving, and like I don't there. I think the action does a really good job of telling a story too. Like one thing, the cave troll kind of heads for Frodo
mhm,
immediately, um, and like we understand that like that's kind of one thing that we were told is that all the bad stuff in the world is going to be drawn to Frodo, even if it doesn't understand why it's being drawn to Frodo,
mhm,
because he's wearing the ring. And I love like the little micro stories we do amongst this action, where like Aragorn sees that Frodo's in trouble. He like is desperately trying to get over there, but he's like keeps being stopped by goblins getting in his way, and he's trying to push through them to get there. And he gets there eventually, and then gets tossed away. And you see this like we do this perfect cut to him when the cave troll picks up the spear, or removes the spear that Aragorn stabbed him with,
mhm.
out of his body, and then uses it on Frodo. Like it's like it's telling a story within the action sequence, and that's consistent with all the action sequences in this whole film. I think like
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much of that. I mean, you could really pick any moment, like
yeah,
the final battle where you've got like just tons of orcs. And I won't say that the geography is clear, because honestly, it's not. But the fact is, it doesn't matter. Like I think the movie smartly is like, okay, look, where Boromir and the other hobbits are is just like over there,
yeah, yeah.
and everybody else is over here,
Mhm.
and that's all we really need to know. Um,
Well, I mean, we did a really good job of kind of, I agree with you. Geography of the scene is not exactly clear, but we do a very good job of telling the story as to why the fellowship is kind of not all in the same place.
yeah,
Why there would be a separation of the characters.
right, exactly. Yeah, it's nothing that ever bothers you.
Hmm.
Yeah, I always kind of marvel at that sequence, because do you see this massive like crowd of orcs walking up to Aragorn, and he like, salutes them, and you're like, oh, like how's this gonna work? Like he's gonna fight all these guys, and like it actually works. We're
Yeah,
like in a way that doesn't, because like normally you sort of cheat your way out of that, but like he fights, but then he like uses the terrain of the sort of ruins that he's near to get to, so he only really has to fight one or two of them at once.
yeah,
And then by the time he's killed a few of them, Gimli and Legolas show up, and then Legolas kills 700,000 of them, because he's Legolas, and like it kind of makes sense in that way. Yeah, just really
yeah.
good stuff there. I
I
agree.
mean, another thing that's just like textually true about these stories is these characters are just like super
Yeah.
people,
Yes.
like it's like if you're playing Warcraft 3, like they're the hero classes, and so
Yeah.
like you can't take down a hero class with just an army of normies. It's just not going to work. And so like that never bothered me because that's just the thing, right? Is
Right.
like and that's honestly why it's so jarring the first time Boromir gets hit, because
Mhm.
like just the choice to just have this guy, this boss orc, we'll call him, just like casually from 100 yards just nail him with an arrow, and you're like, wait a minute, no, that's not, because obviously any orc in the whole army could have done that at any time, right? They could
Uh-huh.
have just fired an arrow at him, but no, this guy is different and special, and these are the arrows that get through somehow. And it's just like, this is not how this is supposed to work. This is not what's supposed to happen. These are our hero characters.
Mhm.
It's excellent. Like the whole thing plays out excellently. I love the shot where he's hit Boromir 3 times, and then he decides to walk up to him and
Mhm.
like point blank pull the bow back again
Yeah.
for that finishing shot. And it's like, it's great because he's already dead, right? Like he's dying,
Mhm.
and yet Aragorn like leaping in at the last minute to prevent the finishing shot is like this minor victory where you're just
Mhm.
like, fuck yeah, he didn't save him, he just like saved him from that kind of disgraceful death or whatever.
Yeah.
Everything like I said, the story of the action beats I think is just so spectacularly done.
Yeah.
I know like what one of the big changes they made is that the Boromir death, I believe, happens, doesn't this whole battle happen at like the beginning of the Two Towers and not at the end of this book?
Well, Boromir's death happens at the beginning of the Two Towers. I
Yeah.
forget which like exact parts fall where, but
I mean, the confusing thing is after the first book, the Two Towers and Return of the King are divided into sections, and they basically will tell the whole story of those characters, right? So like book 1 of the Two Towers is the Frodo and Sam story, and we see everything that happens to Frodo and Sam in that book. Then book 2 of the Two Towers is the Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli section, and then we see everything that happens in them with them throughout the story that's running concurrently. That's how Tolkien wrote it. So
Mhm.
I don't know how that lines up with the Boromir death, but you are correct. I'm almost 99% certain that the Boromir death happens at the beginning of Two Towers, and it's
Yeah.
like it's such a genius and simple move to go like, no, 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 this is our climax. Like
Right.
this is the moment we end the film on.
Yeah.
And it's perfect. It's the Boromir death is one of the greatest death scenes ever put to film ever.
It
It
is.
does everything that a death scene needs to do.
This movie has two of the best death scenes ever
Yes,
put to film.
yes, yes.
This is it. That's what is crazy is like we've just spent a big chunk of time talking about the action, and I love the action, and it's objectively incredibly high quality action that you could study. But that's not even my favorite part of the movie. Like
Hmm.
it's the drama of it and the emotion, the emotionality of it.
Yeah,
Like the there are so many, the whole Gandalf and the Balrog, like we talked about the Moria scene, and it's like that's the first part. It goes on
yeah,
to the Balrog scene, which I remember like my head. I mean, I kind of knew what I was getting, but the funny thing about the book is that you don't really know what the Balrog is going to look like because it's
yeah,
just not described visually. So then they make it this incredible thing, and this incredibly dramatic scene, and Gandalf falls, and all the characters are weeping, which again, very Peter Jackson, letting the scene breathe, focusing on the characters' faces as they're weeping. Everyone gets their own little moment of their reaction, right?
yeah,
Every single character, even Gimli, who it is the comic relief character in some ways, has his own reaction to this moment. And like Boromir is like holding the hobbits, trying to like comfort them, right? Like
yeah,
that's a very consistent thing, is that Boromir is by far the more human of the two men. Like Aragorn is always like stern, and Boromir wants to like play, basically.
yeah,
He's
hmm,
he's the cool dad.
yeah,
But that's that Boromir's death, even just like Frodo standing on the riverside with the ring, with the music, and remembering what Gandalf said, I find just incredibly powerful, incredibly poignant. Gosh, like
yeah.
I don't know if it's just because I grew up with this movie and I've watched it 50 times and it's sort of worn a groove in my brain, but the movie just hits me so many times over the
Yeah.
course of its runtime, and the whole series is like this. Like that's fundamentally my favorite thing about this, both the movies and really like the subject matter, is it's speaking to these timeless themes and kind of beautiful ideas and beautiful characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's almost unfair because like they had such good, just incredible source material to work with here. Like Walsh and Philippa Boyens, like some of the best lines in this movie are just lines from the book, which is
Yeah.
like we just ripped that line from the book because it's one of the best books ever written. But yeah, I mean, like nothing but respect for them for figuring out how to take these moments, and like the moments by themselves wouldn't work on film without everything else around it, and they just consistently figure out how to take these moments and build to them and craft story around them and craft performances around them. Like one thing I was paying attention to that I don't know if I've ever paid attention to as much is that Moria scene with Gandalf talking to Frodo. You know, the scene where he talks about pity um and all that.
Hmm.
Like I never paid enough attention to Gandalf and his point and his like I think perspective in these moments, because I think Gandalf, once they are stuck in Moria, he kind of on some deep level knows I'm not going to live through this thing. Like quote unquote live, you know. Well,
Hmm. Yeah.
we don't have to worry about the complications of the Mithrandir, but that like this he knows he's gonna come in contact with the Balrog. That's why he's afraid to go down there, and he knows like this is probably gonna end in his death. And like I just remember, or I don't remember, but just listening to the way he's talking to Frodo about these things, he sounds tired. He sounds exhausted, and he sounds maybe a little bit more uncertain of himself. I mean, it's perfect, like story dressing that the place this conversation is happening is in a lull in the action because Gandalf has forgotten which of the three tunnels they're supposed to go down to. So we put him in this place where he's struggling to remember something, and the Fellowship's journey has halted because of his inability to remember. And then we put this conversation where he's like trying to impart lessons to Frodo. And he's exhausted and tired and uncertain of himself. And the thing that I love about the scene that I don't think I've ever truly noticed is we get to that the beautiful like Sodowall who sees such times, but that's not for us to decide moment. And it is this moment where he gives Frodo the strength to go on, but like you kind of see how he's talking himself up at the same time.
Hmm.
Like he's imparting this wisdom, but he's also like resetting himself and recomposing himself to go forward into what is certainly going to be his death. And I don't think it's an accident that right after that sequence, oh, suddenly he remembers the right way, right? Like
Hmm.
he makes a joke about it. It's like follow your nose, but like I think it's that's part of it is like he's imparting this wisdom, but it's infecting himself as well. And just like that's Ian McKellen, man. That's just Ian McKellen killing it through
Yeah.
that sequence.
Never really thought about it quite that way, so I really appreciate that. Yeah, I guess you could say maybe he genuinely doesn't know which way to go, but his own little pep talk reminds him, like, well, you have to continue going forward,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you know which way to go. And so just pick the best option and go,
Mhm.
because you've got to make a choice, and you don't have the choice of not choosing. That's kind of exactly the lesson that he's trying to give to Frodo here.
Yeah, and I
Um,
got the feeling, and maybe this is just my knowledge of what happens next impacting how I'm reading the scene, but I kind of got the feeling that he on some maybe subconscious level knows this is the last conversation I'm going to have with Frodo.
mhm.
Like
Yeah.
this is my last moment to impart some guidance and wisdom to him before I know he's going to have to go on his own. Like, and I think that might be true even if like he didn't die, like even if he's not certain he's going to die, like he's watching the Fellowship splinter, like he's fully aware that Boromir is succumbing to the ring and this whole thing is going to collapse eventually. So like maybe even if he's not like I think I'm going to die around this next corner, he's like I have very few times left to help
Mhm.
this guy before he will eventually have to go off on his own.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
so
I think that's an interesting point. For whatever reason, I was also thinking similar. Like, wait, dude. I mean, Galadriel seems to know like immediately, like Frodo's just going to have to go off on his own. There's no
yeah, yeah,
way. Like this whole fellowship thing that was fine for getting him across the mountain, and but like once they get past a certain point, he's going to have to go on his own. And I think I don't remember exactly, but I feel like even she doesn't necessarily foresee that Sam is going to be with him, but maybe she
yeah.
does. I get confused about this. Um, but but I think Gandalf probably knows just as well as Galadriel does that he needs to give this guy some some sort of like you said, wisdom, some kind of pep talk, some kind of like he needs to convey some of his sense of the moral value of this terrible burden that he's been given, so that it'll just get him through it. um
Hmm.
I don't know, like that's just a step back. I guess this is more of a comment on the whole series, but like there's some that's the thing that is unique about the Lord of the Rings, right? Is like your hero is not it is not a classic hero's journey, really,
Yeah.
because it's not young Luke Skywalker, who's a young farm boy, is he learns the ways of the Force and he becomes a badass, and he defeats the evil single-handedly because he's a badass, and then he gets the girl. No. This is Frodo. He's basically like he's a creature whose adult form is still basically a child. He's never going to be any kind of badass, except maybe like a moral badass. And the whole like he just suffers the whole series. Like it's an unfair burden. It's a painful, physically and mentally and spiritually draining and painful burden that's been put on him. And really in addition to like the material drama of like, are they going to get to the mountain, it's like, is he just going to break?
Yeah.
Like, and you're just feeling for him the whole time. I think Elijah Wood is somewhat underappreciated, just because I think he gets overlooked because everything around him is so interesting, and he's just kind of sitting there suffering a lot of the time. But he
Yeah.
really does a great job in all.
Oh, he's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I
yeah,
mean, the Elijah Wood scream, like the no scream when Gandalf dies,
yeah, yeah,
perfect. It's perfect.
yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like it's funny too because that hero's journey story is happening in this trilogy. It's just not it's just not the main story. Like the Aragorn like coming to his throne story is a big part of the story, right? And that I think is much more in line with the typical hero's journey type thing. Um but it is only half of what's going on here, and it
Hmm.
is arguably the less important half.
Yeah,
Because it is not the half that saves everything.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's this moral story, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's no secret. It's fundamentally like a Catholic morality tale,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but done in a way where it doesn't feel at all, preachy. It's like
Mhm.
this is just it's about humanity, right? It's not.
Yeah,
It always feels to me. I mean, even though I literally just said those words, like it feels reductive to be like, yes, it's from a Catholic worldview. It's like, okay, yeah, but it's about humanity and the nature of like what is good and what is it to live a good life in a world where everything sucks.
yeah,
And like you've been dealt an unfair hand in life. Are what are you going to do about that? That happens to everyone.
yeah,
That's not that's no particular faith has a claim on that. And I think the story just deals with it so beautifully and upliftingly.
yeah.
um Even just this movie, although of course you don't quite conclude on that until the end of everything.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, but, like, I think the ending of this movie is remarkable. Like,
Hmm.
like, this this wonderful moment, which I don't know, standard joke. Like I love the meme online of when Aragorn kicks the helmet in the second movie, where he
Uh-huh.
just everyone's like immediately has to go. He broke his foot. He broke his foot when he did that.
Uh-huh.
But mine is the Sam running into the water
Uh-huh.
after Frodo bit, because he slices his foot open and it's like this whole huge thing there. I think of that every time, but like that entire sequence from that moment up until them getting out of the water and climbing up and looking towards Mordor at the end, and just this this foreboding but magical moment of friendship. It just like
Mhm.
it just is the perfect way to conclude upon this thing that makes you excited for what's to come, but also fearful and worried for I just looking at these two tiny little hobbits and how much more they have to go, and it's like, how the fuck are they going to do this? But then like you get this moment of solidarity and friendship, and I like Sam's like purpose in this story is just to have these moments of I guess we'll never see them again. We may
Mhm.
yet, Mr. Frodo. We may. And it's just like this like perfect emotional beat mixed in with all this terror and uncertainty. And it's just like they know how to exactly mess with our emotions. They're just so this the whole
Yeah.
movie is just so good at it at every turn.
Yeah, right. I think one of the only tweet replies that ever gave me a strong emotional reaction was someone tweeting like about how Aragorn is this great like masculine role model that we should all view, and instead of the Andrew Tates of the world, whatever, some culture war talking point basically.
Mhm.
And then like the reply was just like the picture of Sam holding up the light against um Shelob, and it's
Mhm.
like actually like this is just as good if not better of a masculine role model. And it's just kind of like what got me about that actually was like Sam is a much less of a physical badass, but does way more awesome things in this story because he is brave and selfless, right?
Yeah.
Like he's the one who fought the giant demon spider. Aragorn never fights a giant demon spider, right? And it's
No.
and it's like the thing about that that's moving isn't like, oh, that was real badass when he stabbed the spider. It's like, no, it's because he's a little hobbit and
Yeah.
with no armor and no combat training at all, and he's doing this just to save his friend.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, the Lord of the
yeah,
Rings spends a lot of time talking about the importance of Sam and his role
yeah,
in both the story and this book, and also his societal role. I think this is like, we could one day when we talk about the Lord of the Rings, we'll really get into what Tolkien was doing with like the Master Frodo and the
mm,
the, the Master Servant relationship, which is essentially like textually in the book what this relationship is. It's also a very wonderful friendship, but it is that as well.
mm,
And what Tolkien is exploring with that. But yeah, I mean, he like if Aragorn was the ring bearer, he would have failed, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's just a factual statement
mhm,
there. And so like the importance of hobbits, the importance of the power of you know friendship and bravery and all these things that come from unexpected places, that's like textually just theme stuff we're working with here. Like Aragorn is the big mighty king, and yes, this is a story about how the kings of men are just better than everyone else. Like that's what the story is about, but in a lot of very traditionally masculine ways, sure. But yeah, I mean, you have these characters who defy all expectations, resist the power of the ring like no one else could, and do awesome stuff for three movies. And they're wonderful. They're the best, the
mhm.
most bravest hobbitses in the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the things that is better overall in the extended cuts. If you watch all three of them kind of end to end, you realize that all of the hobbits are incredibly compelling characters.
Hmm.
Because I do feel that especially Merry and Pippin get a bit short shrift in the normal cuts.
Yeah.
Um, whereas like really they have their own arcs. They start out as like naive hobbits, but sort of in different ways, and then they have their own parallel but distinct journeys toward coming to embody the heroic virtues and
Yeah.
be brave. And of course, it's all elevated by the fact that they're these tiny little hobbits who are never going to be the warriors that they need to be in a sense. Like
Yeah.
it's interesting that yeah
You're right. I mean, their their arcs are wonderful. Like that's one of the things that the extended, not watching the extended edition loses, is you don't get to see the Galadriel gifts to the hobbits.
hmm
I love the line she says to Pippin. I think it is like, "Don't worry, you'll find your bravery," or something like that, or you'll
yeah
find your courage. I think she says,
yeah
and that's so important because that is part of his arc. Is and I've said this many times. I'll say it again. One of my favorite parts in the entire trilogy is when they're at the gates of Moria or Mordor, and Aragorn looks back at his friends and says, "For Frodo, who are the people that charge right after him? It's Merry and Pippin.
yeah
They're the two. They're the after Aragorn. They are the two." And of course, it's funny because their legs are smaller, so everyone passes them
yeah
by. But that doesn't matter because they are the ones that have gone through this journey that start out as just a comic relief, very good comic relief. I enjoy all their funny scenes, and they become warriors, I guess, like if not
yeah
physical specimens of
yeah
warrior, but braver
well
and as brave as any other person on that battlefield.
yeah they do. I think I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the movie actually, because it's making me sort of put things together that I may not have ever quite put together. Because like, for example, Pippin is the most directly responsible for Gandalf, dying, quote unquote, because he can't stop himself from messing around with stuff, sort of not taking things seriously and
Yeah,
being the naive, bumbling hobbit that he is. He
yeah,
causes the giant noise that then wakes up the orcs, and the orcs wake up the Balrog, and that's how Gandalf is killed. And the movie never says this directly. Like Pippin never looks at the camera and says, "I feel guilty about the fact that I caused Gandalf to fall into the pit," but he does.
hmm,
And then what we do with that is he's the one who like stands over Gandalf while the Witch King break after the Witch King breaks his staff in the third movie.
yeah.
And it's true that Pippin doesn't really accomplish much there, but
Doesn't matter.
he
Yeah,
stands his ground is the important thing.
yeah,
And he's running around, trying to save Faramir and doing all this stuff. So like I just think it's important that the first moment was him like letting down Gandalf, and then he is now defending Gandalf, at the end. And then I think it's actually paralleled even more, because it's then the ring wraith, the Witch King flies away, and then like the next thing he does is get stabbed in the leg by Mary. So
hmm,
the two of the hobbit, the two little hobbits, the two secondary hobbits are some of the last two creatures that the Witch King encounters,
yeah.
and
That's
and,
true.
and they're both being incredibly brave, especially given their lack of actual capabilities.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a thought while watching this movie this time, though.
hmm.
I agree with everything you just said there, and I don't want this to make it seem like I'm not. But like, imagine you're an Urukai,
Uh-huh.
bred for a single purpose:
Uh-huh.
to destroy the world of men.
Uh-huh.
And you come out of your gross mud birth, whatever that was,
Uh-huh.
and you get armed and you sent on your way, and you got to jog like 20 miles, and it's like, finally, this is your entire reason for existence. Here's the bad guys. I'm gonna go, and you charge Boromir of Gondor,
Uh-huh.
the son of the steward, and then like this little 3 foot tall loser
Uh-huh.
just stabs you in the face.
Uh-huh.
You're just like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah. Well,
Like, just imagine being that warrior orc that was
uh,
like a special breed of orc. And
uh-huh.
like Pippin is just Pippin.
Yeah.
He's not a
Well,
warrior.
yeah.
He had like one sword lesson from Boromir.
Yeah. The thing is that the orcs are all 2 days old, and Saruman forgot that they'd be really poorly coordinated, actually, and so they die really easily.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
at least those ones
Well,
specifically.
they're mentally unwell because the one guy decides to lick a knife instead of attack the
Yeah.
the guy he's
Yeah.
fighting.
Well, let's chalk this up to evil destroys itself, because like they're so bloodthirsty and eager to kill Boromir that they don't even appreciate the danger of the hobbits.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I mean, look, I was making a joke. I don't
yeah,
actually think.
I know, but
that,
like, yeah, no, I mean, I'm just to finish the thought though. Like, I think the fact that they were told to capture the hobbits rather than kill them actually does put them at a bit of a disadvantage there, if we're taking this seriously as a complaint, which I understand
yeah,
you're not.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
anyway,
I just think
um,
it'd be just like you got to feel like shit. Like it's like in Black Hawk Down when the guy falls out of the
yeah,
helicopter, like right before all the fighting starts, and it's like that's the Uruk-hai that gets killed by Pippin throwing a rock at him.
uh huh. No, that's delightful. Or just any of the ones who rushes Aragorn in a giant mob and he just kills them in one hit, and they're just like, oh,
I
yeah.
would feel bad if I'm the one that Legolas stabs with the arrow before he knocks the arrow to shoot the other one.
Uh-huh.
That's like you didn't even consider me a thing.
Uh-huh.
Like at least the other guy he had to like knock and draw the bow. But
Right.
me, I just got stabbed in the eye with an arrow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny to consider this movie in isolation, because pretty much the whole movie Legolas is not doing that many crazy things. I guess he does like get up on the back of the troll for a second.
Yeah, but he shoots
Um
like one arrow and then falls. Like
yeah.
I think the later movies get a little ridiculous with Aragorn, just a little bit.
Uh-huh. It,
Or sorry,
it
no, Legolas,
Well,
Legolas, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. There's some things about over the course of the whole series where I think we're probably on the same page about, like, it's probably not how I would have done that specific thing, but none
I
of it
mean, look, I'm never
bothers
gonna
me.
say that him skateboarding downstairs on a shield is not the coolest thing I've ever
Uh-huh.
seen, but it is a little silly in
Yeah,
retrospect.
yeah, right. I think that's one of the things. I guess just like I think I think in some ways this is the best of the three movies. Now the thing is, you could make the case that Return of the King is the best of the three movies for like a different set of reasons, right? But like Return of the King has the whole like Men Under the Mountain ghosts thing, which I'm just not that fond of. But then
Yeah.
it also has like so many incredible scenes in it that it's like, okay, whatever. I just kind of don't, I can't care that much. But this movie, the Fellowship of the Ring, really has nothing in it that isn't like perfect
Yeah.
to me.
I completely agree. Like every scene worked for me, every moment.
Yeah.
Like we haven't talked about when the hobbits get debris at all, but
Mhm.
just like how like Peter Jackson really turns up the horror, and there's nothing specifically scary. It's just like, oh, these are tiny hobbits in the world of men for the first time, and like all these men are like super tall and gross and dirty, and
Yeah.
they're just terrified the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The camera angle is always this like extreme angle that
Yeah,
emphasizes how like they're always crowded in and everyone is towering over them, and the architecture is clearly not built for them. They
yeah.
feel small and
And they had to build these giant man suits in order to have people walk by them in the
Mhm.
shot, which is like another like attention to detail thing that you just love, right? Because like they wanted the hobbits to feel tiny and overwhelmed in this world, and so like they needed a shot, like just a perfect way of doing that is just having a shot where a person walks by them and is 3 feet taller than them. But
Yeah.
then how do you do that with their camera tricks? Well, they just built like this kind of dude on stilts thing,
Uh-huh.
and he just walks by, and like once you know it's like dude on stilts, you can kind of see, maybe you can kind of see through that illusion a little bit, but it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in all these movies where I have seen exactly how they do it, and it actually used to bother me when I was like a teenager or whatever, and but I've just, I guess maybe thankfully just like forgotten all of those things on some
Hmm.
level, or at least I have to like dig for them in my memory, so I just don't see that anymore, and it just goes back to being perfect.
Yeah.
Just like one moment that I always have to call out about these movies, which happens in Brie, and I think it's important because it's sort of the only time we really really see Sauron ever, except
Mhm.
except the prologue where he doesn't speak, is when Frodo puts on the ring in Bree accidentally, and it's just this nightmare, right? It's like so visually. Again, I'm going to return to what I said earlier about like the visual style and the aesthetic sensibility that is so unique and weird, and like almost alien, where you're like it doesn't look like anything else when he goes into this like shadow realm and all of the men have turned into these just like amorphous shadows,
Yeah.
and the the building around him has turned into this shadow sketched out outline of the building, and then you see, you hear the voice, which is terrifying, and just this enormous, eye the size of the entire screen that's just fire staring at him,
Yeah.
and the terror. Like everything about that sequence, it's like what, 20 seconds or something, and it's like incredibly powerful filmmaking to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's easy now that these images have just been like ingrained in our minds and souls forever to just be like, oh yeah, that was like the most obvious way to do that sequence. But
Hmm.
like, no, it wasn't. Like the book just says he puts on the ring and sees like the eye of Sauron, and
Hmm.
it's like to put that kind of affect to it, I
Hmm.
think is just really really cool. Like I love even when he's not seeing the eye, just like that effect
Hmm.
that's on when he's wearing the ring, I think is really really cool. And then yeah,
Yeah.
the eye is terrifying and overwhelming and perfect. Like
Yeah.
it's the perfect choice for how to make that look.
Yeah.
It
And
just
this
is.
the sound, like the overwhelming
Oh,
power
yeah.
of the voice, and you almost can understand what it's saying. It's so like giant,
Hmm.
um, inhumanly powerful, basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Speaking of which, we cannot finish this without talking about the music. We
yeah,
just
yeah.
cannot. And I asked you this early this morning. I was like, what percentage of the success of this film series do you think is up to the music? And how much? What did you say, Matt? What
I,
was the percentage you gave me?
I believe I said 49%.
You did,
Yeah.
yes. Which I think is the perfect answer because it's not more than half, right? It's
Right.
like the reason why this series was good was not majorly the music, but it's a huge part of it
Yeah.
because how like the music is incredible.
Uh huh.
It's like I said, I've watched this movie more times than I can count, and the score still moves me. Every bit of the score, not just
Hmm.
there's some movies where like, oh, it's like one particular motif and or repeated phrase. Like I think Avengers is a really good
Hmm.
example, right? Like I really love the Avengers theme. I think that is a good theme, and then everything else in the movie I couldn't tell
Yeah.
you what it sounded like.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Well, what is Iron Man's theme? Because he has
yeah,
one, but I,
I don't
I
know,
don't.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's every single one. It's every character's theme. It's the Fellowship theme. Just like all of it. The eerie music, the happy like Hobbit music, and the way he intermixes these things. And it's like the Fellowship theme is like the perfect build up and then fuck yeah moment theme. Like just I think the when they rush across the bridge of Khazad-dûm for the first time and that Fellowship theme like hits, you're just like fuck yeah, and
Yeah.
then that fades out to the drums as the Balrog like
Yeah.
it's the best. Oh, oh, am I gonna say this?
Uh huh.
It's the best music score ever written.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it.
I don't think I would disagree. Like for one thing, I'm always reminded of the fact that we have this idea of the whole Tolkien universe being created by the music of the Ainur, which
Hmm.
like is something that was understood and incorporated into the way the soundtrack was made. Like and then you've got like Enya singing in Elvish, like
Yeah.
just this embarrassment of riches of the things like that. But then yes, so just like stepping back from that, just the like moment to moment craft of the score, and the feelings that it's evoking. Um, Everything having its own theme, like you said, the Fellowship theme being this powerful, bombastic thing, but also capable of being inspiring. and the Hobbit's theme,
Mhm.
uh, and then everything is like sort of played off of itself in different places.
Yeah.
There's yeah, I've listened to this to these soundtracks just countless times, and there's so many things, many of which happen in the later movies, where it really does something I think unique actually in film, at least that I know of. Because like for example, during the charge of the Rohirrim in the third movie, it's this interesting blending of the typical Rohan theme, sort of with different intonation, and then it like changes at a certain point and becomes more triumphant, because the Rohan theme is this like keening, sort of wistful,
Mhm.
tragic tone, but then it transforms and it becomes this triumphant battle hymn that kind of in some ways matches with the just the big the fellowship theme, you could say, the Lord of the Rings theme, right? um and then there's other places where like the evil Sauron, darkness Mordor theme like morphs toward the end of the movie into like a different basically a different key, and sort of transforms into something else. So there's these music motifs that are built up over the course of these movies, where we're introduced to them, and then they're sort of reinforced to us, and then they're reinforced with a modification, and then they're kind of transformed, and it's this like the story is being told with the music actually. I mean,
Yeah.
and you can just listen to the soundtracks. Like I've done this where I'll just go for a long drive and I'll just listen to the soundtracks end to end, and I can see the whole movie happening in my head, and I can see
Mhm.
exactly what's happening and what emotional beat is being punctuated by what musical choice. And then these sort of intentional changes to the music really jump out when you pay attention to it that way. But I don't know of anything else that's really quite like this soundtrack.
No, and it's really interesting too because it's one of those things where like Howard Shore has done a lot of music, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that the other soundtracks he's done aren't good. Um, they're not this though,
Yeah.
and that's like there was a while there where I was like I loved this music so much that like every time I saw Howard Shore composer on a movie, I was like, oh fuck yeah, this is gonna
Mhm.
be awesome. And I was like always kind of a little bit disappointed because there was no way it was ever going to be as good as this. And it's like a wild and magical thing happened with this movie where it's just like it was all these people coming together at the exact right time to make the exact right thing, the lightning in a bottle moment. And it upped everyone's game. It did.
Yeah.
Like, are there people in this movie where this trilogy is not like their apex of their career? Like, is there a single person in that involved in this thing where this is not like their apex?
I mean, the only thing that jumps to mind would be just the fact that Sean Bean, and Ian McKellen are basically just actors who have giant careers, right?
Yeah.
But these are clearly s- important roles, even in their careers. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Sean Bean might be the exception, and
Mhm.
that's maybe only because he's like a third of the screen time as a lot
Mhm.
of these other characters.
Mhm.
Um, and like I don't know, like I guess Orlando Bloom would probably want to be like, no, 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 it was the Pirates movies, which fair. I think he's
Yeah.
definitely the lead in that series, so that makes sense. But
Right. Especially since he was paid like $150,000 for the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy.
yeah, yeah, because he was nobody. Nobody
Yeah.
knew who he was, and his role was just to like stand there
Yeah.
most of the series, which he does a very good job of standing there. I love like speaking of world building stuff that they never really draw attention to when they're crawling through the snow to get up the mountain,
Mhm.
and everyone's like waist deep in snow, and he's just walking on the top of it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh,
And no one call like there's no line where like Boromir's like, oh elves, like it's
Uh-huh.
just a thing that's just happening silently in the film.
Yeah. He's an elf. He can do that. Why? It
Yeah,
doesn't. It's because he's an
he's just an
elf.
elf.
Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, like I love Peter Jackson. I've like Peter Jackson's he's gotten really into documentaries lately and he's doing a killer job. Like the Beatles documentary he put together is like one of my favorite things ever too. But this is definitely the apex of his career.
Yeah,
I just like he could make hit movies every year after this, and it would still never live up to what this is. So I mean, it's
yeah,
got to be. It's Elijah Wood is a really cool dude. I've met him, but
that's
this is
great.
the best thing he's ever done by far.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, right. I mean, I'm just I'm like, I think, I mean, definitely in terms of pop culture, like I feel like Ian Holm has probably had, you know,
yeah,
more significant things, but in terms of like where do you know Ian Holm from?
right.
There's two things: Alien and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, you're not wrong when we start talking about these character actors
yeah,
like
yeah,
Christopher Lee and Ian Holm, and
right,
yeah, I mean Ian McKellen certainly as well. Like it's like these are these guys who have such an amazing career that they've like just like 12 things are their
yeah.
apex, but yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm not. I feel like I'm like nitpicking the point, which is just like there was a magic, there was a synergy where, and I think it helped that just like so many of the people involved in this project were like, Lord of the Rings is the most important thing in my life.
yeah,
So I'm going to go above and beyond for this. This is not just a movie. This is not just a thing that we're going to do and then it's going to be over. This is something that maybe inspired me my whole life, and I'm going to pour blood, sweat, and tears and love into this thing. And then you've got Peter Jackson at the helm, who just embodies that. Um, and yeah, I think that's what makes it. That's what makes it special. Like you can't. There's no substitute for that.
yeah,
Um, like it's not that he's a really good project manager, which I'm sure he is, but like it's that he embodies the love of this story in this
yeah,
world,
yeah.
and that's inspiring. And um yeah,
Completely agree. Wow, what a movie! What a trilogy! We're never going to see something like this again. I mean, that's I think the really sad part is like it's easy to look back at this now and say, of course, you should have made this incredibly expensive trilogy that you filmed back to back to back, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars because it was going to be a huge smash hit. But like they didn't know that. They
yeah,
didn't know that. They rolled the dice on this thing and it paid off.
yeah.
And like I just don't know if a team that has the capability of making something like this is going to be given the leeway by a studio to do it
No,
anymore.
no, I don't think so. I mean, it was totally crazy, right? Even at the time,
Yeah.
there's who knows what is apocryphal exactly, but I feel like I feel like the story is, they came trying to get funding for a Lord of the Rings movie, and the guy on the other side of the table was like, "What are you talking about? This is obviously a trilogy." And they got the funding and they did it. And somehow, like the weirdest thing to me, I guess, not the weirdest thing, but the thing that I can never fully wrap my head around is like the budget of these movies, by all rights, should have been like $5 billion, right? But somehow they did it with, you know, less than
I
100
think it's
million
under 100 million for each
per
movie.
per movie. Yeah, which I guess I can't easily do like inflation adjusted calculations in my head, but like re- that strikes me as a incredibly reasonable number, considering that the CGI that they were doing was at the time super cutting edge and difficult and expensive, and then just the enormous amounts of detailed and incredibly good looking, costuming and props and settings and different settings. Like how many different like set pieces are in this movie?
So many. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the funny thing about this. Like, you would think in a project like this, part of your selling point with the budget stuff would be like, yeah, like we're gonna spend a lot of money for the first one, but then we get to reuse all that shit for. Oh no, no, we don't. No, we don't actually. We have
yeah.
to build all new shit. So we're gonna go back to Rivendell, right? Well,
There'll be maybe a flashback or two.
yeah.
We'll see it for a second.
Actually, we're gonna go to this new horse place,
Uh-huh.
and they dress and their architecture is completely different.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah, build all that. And then the third movie, we're gonna go to a new place, and it's people too, but they're totally different people.
Uh-huh.
So we were gonna have to build all that again too.
Yeah.
So
Right. And there's going to be an army of like 3 million orcs,
yeah,
and we don't at this moment, going to be honest, have any idea how we're going to do that.
yeah. We're
But
probably gonna find a way to invent some sort of new crowd CG technology.
yeah.
But
That's a
don't
detail.
yada yada. Don't
Yeah,
worry
yeah.
about it.
That's someone else's problem. That's future Peter Jackson's problem. Um,
It is kind of. I mean, I don't think the suits get enough credit, Matt. It is kind of like it's part of the miracle that is this trilogy that like someone looked at this and said, "Yeah, here's some money." Like,
uh-huh.
just again in 2024 with the amount of like nerd culture that has become mainstream, it just seems like a foregone conclusion.
Mhm.
But this was not the case in the late 90s when they were trying to sell and make this thing. It
Yeah.
just was not the case at all.
Right. It's interesting that but maybe the young listeners won't like know or appreciate this, but like the like nerd shit was for nerds.
Hmm.
And it didn't have this like mass acceptance where it's like, oh, you're gonna go see the new Marvel movie? Of course, we're all gonna go see the new Marvel movie, right? It's like if there was a superhero movie in the theaters, that's kind of nerd shit. You don't want to like necessarily
Yeah.
talk about it. Lord of the Rings. Oh my god, are you serious? You're reading that nerd book, but that this like forced everyone to be like, no, this is the best thing you've ever seen. It is not for nerds anymore. Like I unironically think this movie was sort of one of the things that caused a vibe shift, to use the modern terminology, where
Yeah.
it's like you cannot deny that this is incredible. Everyone who watches this movie will love it.
Yeah, I mean, this movie came out and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone came out in the same year.
Hmm.
And so I do think these two things back to back were part of the movement towards the victory of nerd culture.
Yeah.
Now one of these things is very, very good, and the other one is Harry Potter. Which okay, the books are fine. I thought the Harry Potter movies were mostly pretty meh, especially that first one. But
Yeah.
I understand why they're very popular. But the,
Right.
the point I'm trying to make, and I think to give Star Wars its credit, I think the prequels, as divisive as they were part of this big push because that was huge in pop culture swallowing
Yeah,
when the
yeah.
prequels came out as well.
That's true. That's true. That's a big part of it. And what's funny is at the time people didn't hate the prequels. It was only later that we all decided we hated the prequels.
Yeah, I mean, some people did, but
Well, yeah, okay, that's true.
eighth grade Scott
Yeah,
certainly did not.
but there wasn't a thriving YouTube critic community at the time to
Yeah,
sort of tell everyone what to think.
true.
Not that I'm saying I think that the prequels were good. I'm just saying that that there was no such thing as a critical consensus, because how could there be without YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, I think the critics did not like the prequels, but I also think the the average person who is going to excitedly see a Star Wars film is probably not opening up the newspaper to
Right?
read Roger Ebert's review of
Yeah.
Episode One.
Right. Let me. I think I was being a little bit too, ironic when I said there was no such thing as a critical consensus because there was no YouTube. That was a joke. Of course, there was. It's just we didn't know what that consensus was
Yeah,
because it was harder to get plugged into these things.
yeah, especially as kids, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So after all that, I'm gonna vote no on it being entered into the canon.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you, Scott. No.
I think no further explanation needed there, right?
Yeah. Right. Stands on its own. Yeah.
Yeah. I okay. So I try to be a very open and understanding person, especially when it comes to art and the consumption of art, which is very subjective. Everyone likes different things. I think the worst thing you could possibly do is get annoyed with someone on the internet for liking something you don't or not liking something you do. I think that's all silly. But listeners,
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna vote no on this movie, you're gonna have to explain why. Because, like, I understand that there's probably people out there that don't think this is a perfect movie, like I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it very hard to believe that there's people out there that don't at least think this is a pretty good movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a movie that everyone should watch at least once in their lives. If we're gonna have such a list, then I
Is there
think
a person out there that just says, I don't care for it?
yeah,
Not really my tempo.
yeah.
I want to meet you.
I can imagine such a person to be.
I mean,
to be honest.
there must,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
who are you?
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is, please head to the link on Patreon and cast your vote, yes or no, if the Fellowship of the Ring should be entered into the canon, the Doof canon of greatest films of all time. I think you actually know how we're gonna vote, obviously.
Yep. It's like one of my favorite movies. So yeah.
The Fellowship of the Ring has a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Rotten.
Leah Rosen from People magazine says, all this plays like a giant game of Myst, with Ring's mythical characters never making the leap from virtual reality to real.
Okay. So I think what this tells us is like 8% of critics are
bad.
What's the word? Do you know what a philosophical zombie is?
Their name is Jonathan Rosenbaum, the top critic from the Chicago Reader, who said, it's full of scenic splendors with a fine sense of scale, but its narrative thrust seems relatively pro forma, and I was bored by the battle scenes.
Okay. All right. Pro forma, huh? Well, I don't know about those $8 words, but me, myself, thought it was a fine film.
This is hilarious. Everyone on screen is all exercised about Frodo's mission, but after 3 hours, it's hard to see why anyone in the audience should be. You know what, Daniel M. Kimmel of the Worcester Telegram and Gazette? Fuck you.
The best part is these reviews are all like 23 years old, probably. So
yeah, that one was from 2002.
Yeah, so I'm glad that we're able to levy these harsh responses. The fun thing is that these negative reviews will be there forever. So 1,000 years from now, somebody will be like, "Did you know that when Fellowship of the Ring came out, it only got a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes?" And then the other guy will be like, "What the hell are you talking about? I don't know what any of the words you just said mean."
Oh, Richard Roper. I always knew I hated you.
What did old Richard say?
He just said, it goes on forever.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And then Scott A. Mance from Scott Mance's moviereviews.com says, I just can't help it. I was just bored of the rings.
Oh my God.
So fucking clever. I'm going to stop doing this now. This is not healthy. But the point is, you should head over to patreon.com/doofmedia and cast your vote. All joking aside, please leave a reason for what you're voting one way or another. If yes, why was this movie important to you? Because I'm sure it was. Because this movie was instrumental to a lot of our generation, and I'm curious what your take on it is. If you didn't like it, let us know that as well. I promise we won't judge you too harshly.
Yeah. You know, if I had to be serious for a moment, I would guess that probably some people don't think it actually adapts the source material the way they thought it should be. Like that's a take I can imagine someone having, even though I don't share it. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's the popular sentiment of this movie is that Tolkien would have hated it, and that's probably true. But like, I almost think that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like you said, I think you said at the beginning of the episode that like the Lord of the Rings as a book series is a masterpiece book series. The Lord of the Rings as a movie series is a masterpiece movie series, and they don't need to overlap. Like I think it's a successful adaptation, but it's also very very different from what
Yeah.
the books are.
Yeah, like I feel like Tolkien's genuine reaction would be two things. Number one, he would love the music, and then number two, he would probably be annoyed by a lot of things. But I think that he would feel like the heart of the story is where the heart of his books is, which is like
Yeah.
the hobbits and they're suffering and striving with this heavy burden.
I wonder
And
if he would go like, "Fuck, that's what Minas Tirith looks like." Shit, you did it. Good job.
yeah, I wonder. I do sometimes wonder. Like, I have thought about this. Like if you had a time machine and you could show it to him, like, would he be like cool, or would he just be like,
That's the Shire.
yeah,
That's what I saw in my head. That's the Shire.
yeah? I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. We'll never know
Never know.
until until you get around to inventing that time machine, Matt.
I'm
Any day now.
working on it.
All right. All right. Look forward to seeing what people vote on this one. I think this is one of the surest locks in the history of the show in my mind, but we'll see.
You'll see.
All right, Matt. I wanted to wrap things up because we've been going for a while today. I figured we would, but I wanted to wrap things up just to kind of outline what our next kind of mini project is. I had this idea, and we'll see if this is a good idea or not. I don't actually know. But instead of doing like a deconstructing of a director, I thought it would be fun to like deconstruct a franchise. And when I was looking at like what franchises I would want to do that for, one that kept coming to mind was the Planet of the Apes. Partially because a new Planet of the Apes film just came out a couple months ago that I have you seen? I have not seen it.
Nope, have not.
Really want to see it. I really love the series. I think it's really, really interesting. There are 10 movies total. The first 5 are films that came out in the late 60s, early 70s, kind of like back to back to back to back to back. They really rushed these things out. Then, of course, there's the Tim Burton movie that came out the same year as Lord of the Rings. Just seeing that now. Oops.
Crazy.
And then of course there's the modern trilogy that Matt Reeves directed 2 movies of that I really really loved, and now there's a 4th movie in that same continuation. I think these are really interesting movies because I think it is one of the longest running franchises ever. That is the one that people rarely talk about, and I think the movies are definitely films and stories of their time. So I think it'd be fun to dive into these in detail and kind of pick them apart. I don't know how many of these movies have you seen, but is the question I should ask actually.
What's funny is when I was like literally a child, I watched most of the super old ones, but I don't remember them very well at all. So the ones that I remember would actually just be the first one, and then the Tim Burton one, and then Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. But I did not see War for the Planet of the Apes nor the new one. So only, what is that? 4 out of this list.
Okay, so it's going to be a fun journey. Something similar happened to me, by the way. I think it was when DVDs became a thing. My father bought my mother, or vice versa, like a box set of the first 5 films, and we watched them all over the course of like a couple weeks. And that's the last time I've watched them. Very, very, in some ways, extremely 70s movies. In the worst and best ways. I think you will, beneath the Planet of the Apes, will come back to you as you're watching how kind of like insane that movie is. And then they just kind of get crazier from there until the end.
Yeah.
But very, very fun movies. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We'll see how it works, but that's the plan. We're going to be deconstructing Apes for 10 episodes. We'll intersperse them with other things so we don't get all aped out. But I'm looking forward to the original 5. I'm tentatively looking forward to revisiting the Tim Burton one just because it's so bad.
Yeah, that's the only one that I think is just unequivocally a a mess.
Yeah. It
But
does have the greatest ending ever.
it, yeah.
Only second only to the ending of the original film.
And I remember the like the villain in that one. Was that Tim Roth or am I crazy?
It might have been.
Um, yeah, I think it was. I remember him being really fun. Yeah, he was the villain ape.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things in this movie that are worth talking about.
Yeah,
Definite choices made, but
there are definite choices made. That is that is true. Yeah, it'll be fun though. I look forward to it. I know I have some like flashes of memories from these really old ones that are probably doing all kinds of things to my subconscious. So it'll be good to uncover those and have some mental breaks on air with you.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to begin that next week. We will be watching the very first movie, Planet of the Apes, the 1968 Charlton Heston film. I don't know when the last time I've seen this one is.
Me neither.
It's been a long time,
Yep.
but it's going to be a lot of fun. And then, of course, we'll have to watch the Simpsons Planet of the Apes musical episode as well.
Right. That's the thing I'm most looking forward to, of course.
All right, so that series will begin next week. Hope you guys will join us on that. If you've never watched the Planet of the Apes series, I hope you'll give it a try. Definitely the 70s ones have some weird fun in it. So we'll we'll deconstruct those and see what we can learn about this long-lasting franchise.
That's right.
But that is all we had for you this week. If you have any opinions about Lord of the Rings that you feel we didn't talk about or got wrong or whatever, you can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter at doofmedia. The only thing I will say is if you want to talk to us about how we thought that Rings of Power was okay to pretty good and that really upsets you, don't do that.
Yeah, I don't care. If you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find the Doofcast on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, please become a patron of Doof Media. While you are over there voting for Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring to be in the canon, you can also subscribe at any of our available levels. You get a whole bunch of cool bonus things, including being able to be a member of the council that brings these movies for us. They basically, our council nominates films. We take those nominations, we turn them to the rest of the patrons and have them vote on which of those 5 nominations they want us to talk about. And so that's why Fellowship of the Ring is here, and you can be a part of that process. So head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and do it.
That's right. Also, please consider rating and reviewing the Doofcast on Apple Podcasts. Each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
Next week, we got some apes. We'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.